and welcome to your next math lesson. It is called Finding Percentages. You will find this lesson on page 132 in your Jump Math book. Your learning targets for today are: I can convert fractions to decimals and vice versa, and I can find a percent of a number. Now you may be thinking to yourselves, when would I ever use this skill? This is actually one of those skills that I use very often. Have you ever found yourself at a store shopping and the store has a sale advertised? This is the kind of mental math that you can do to figure out how much an item would cost. So let's say that we are in the market for a new mountain bike and we come across this ad in a flyer. It says massive mountain bike sale, up to 30% off. So I've shopped and I've looked and I have found the perfect mountain bike for myself. But I am wondering exactly how much will that mountain bike cost me? Here's a mathematical way to think about it. How can I use multiples of 10 to calculate the percent of the number? Now, most of us don't have those words going through our mind, but we are very curious how much an item will cost us. So here is my perfect mountain bike, but the price tag is $800. I don't have $800 to spend, so it's very good news for me that it is 30% off. Here's where our mental math comes in. Most of us are not able to quickly calculate 30% off. So we can use multiples of 10 because most of us are more comfortable finding 10% of a number. So if we think of 800, what is 10% of that number? So if we divided it into 10 pieces, how much would be 10%? So there's several ways to think about this. You can multiply that number by 10%, but again, the percent means that it's out of 100. So we know that 10% is the same as 0.10. If we multiply 800 times 0.10, we can see that the 1 is one spot over from the decimal. When we multiply by a decimal, we can simply move the decimal place in our original number one spot. Now, it might be hard for you to remember to move it left or to move it right, but let's think about this carefully. 10% of a number is going to be smaller than the original number. So we expect 10% of 800 will be smaller and significantly smaller than 800. We are not trying to make this number bigger. So if we look at our number of 800, we know that it does have a decimal here. You can always add a 0 after the decimal. This still means 800. You can even add a second decimal. Now it really looks like a price, $800.00. So we are going to go ahead and move this decimal place one spot, and we are left with 80. So 10% of 800 is 80. Okay, so we know 10% off would be $80 off. So what would 30% off be? Well, it would be 3 times that amount. So why don't we multiply by 3? 3 times 0 is 0, and 3 times 8 is 24. So my bike is going to be $240 off. So the price I would pay will be 800 minus 240. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 4, that I can't do. I need to borrow. That becomes a 7, and we have 10 minus 4 is 6, and 7 minus 2 is 5. So the price I would pay for this bike with the sale is $560. One thing to note is with sales, if something is 30% off, that means we are actually going to pay 70% of the price. So you may want to skip this step here and simply calculate 80 times 7. And that will save you both of these steps. So we know if it's 30% off, we will pay 70% of the price because 30 plus 70 equals 100. All right, hopefully you are not too confused. This skill certainly takes practice, but if you are an avid shopper, it's a really good skill to have in your back pocket. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of the questions in our Jump Math book. Question 1 on page 130, this should be 132, says, find 1/10 of the number by shifting the decimal point. So question A is done for us. So we started with 4, and we need to find 1/10 of that number. So again, I encourage you, rather than trying to memorize if the decimal should go left or right, ask yourself, am I trying to make a bigger number or a smaller number? So we know that 4 is the same as 4, decimal 0, that hasn't changed the value, and 1/10 is equal to 0.10. So this tells us again that we're going to need to move the decimal point 1 spot, and because we're making the number smaller, we want to go to the left. If we went to the right, we would end up with 40. That's too big. Let's go to the left, and we are left with 0.4. So let's try part B, 7. So 1/10 of a number, you can think of that like you have 10 groups. Maybe you have $7 and you're splitting it between 10 people. How much money would each person get? Well, they certainly wouldn't get $70. They would get less than $1. So let's see. Let's move the decimal 1 spot, and we get 0.7. That's the same as 0.70, 70 cents. So if we have $7 and divide it between 10 people, they each get 1/10 of our $7, and they would get 70 cents. Please try the rest of question 1 on your own. Seems I thought we were on the wrong page. Please note we are on page 132. Question 2 says, 10% is short for 1/10. Find 10% of the number. So again, we are doing the exact same thing as question 1. It's just stating it in a slightly different way. We know that 1/10, 10%, and 0.10 all represent the same value. We'll try 2 of these together, and then you can do the remaining 4. Let's start with 5.7. Again, I think it may be easiest to think of this like money. Let's add a 0 so it looks more like a price. So if we have $5.70, what is 10% of that number? So again, maybe a friend has helped you out with a job, but they weren't all that helpful. You did most of the work. You have agreed to pay them 10%. So they're not going to get as much as you. This number is going to become smaller. So we know that the decimal is going to move 1 place to the left. And 1 place because our decimal is 1 place away from being 1. So our answer is decimal 57. We could add an extra 0, but that won't change the value. But we should write a 0 in front of the decimal. So if that friend or your brother or sister helped you with that job and you agreed to pay them 10%, you would be paying them 57 cents. All right, E might be a tricky one. We're starting with a small number, 600s. Again, if we're thinking money, this would be only 6 cents. So if we find 10% of this number, we're not even going to be left with this 1 whole cent. So again, we move the decimal 1 place to the left, and we're left with 0.006 or 6 thousandths. Please try the remaining questions on your own. Question 3 says, find the percentage using the method above. So I do encourage you to read through that gray box to see an example, but we will do one together. So part A says, find 40% of 15. Now again, that is pretty tricky for most people to do, so we need to break it down into steps. It is much easier to find 10% of this number. Once we find 10%, we can simply multiply by 4 to find out what 40% would be. So just like before, in questions 1 and 2, we are trying to find 10% of 15. So again, note the decimal would be here. 15.0 is the same as 15, represents the same value. 10% again is smaller than 15, so we are going to be moving the decimal place to the left, and we are left with 1.5. 10% of 15 is 1.5 or 1.5. So now we need to find what 40% would be. Well, if we know this is 10% of the number, we can multiply this by 4 to find out what 40% will be. So here you can see they filled this in for you. 4 times 1.5 equals, you could do this in your head, or you can do it the long way. So 5 times 4 is 20. We're going to go ahead and write our 0. Carry the 2. Just ignore the decimal for now. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. Our question has 1 decimal place. The 4 doesn't have a decimal, so we know that our answer will have 1 decimal place. So this 0 here will be part of the decimal. So we know that our decimal goes here. And that sounds about right. If 10% is 1.5, 40% would be 6.0. So in part B, you're going to start by finding 10% of 25, and this answer here will be transferred down to the bottom row because we know to find 60%, we can multiply our answer to the first part by 6. Repeat that for part C. Here you're finding 90% of 31. So once you find 10%, you're going to multiply that by 9. Please cross out question 4 and give yourself a pat on the back. You are done for today.